Hello, and welcome back to the Retire in BC podcast. I'm Arnold, joined by my co-host Ben today. Today we're tackling one of the biggest questions in retirement planning. How big does your portfolio actually need to be to support your retirement cash flow needs?
Yeah, that's right. So if you listened to our last episode, we probably left you wondering how much do I actually need to have saved then? We're hoping to chat about that today. We're going to break down some rules of thumb, a couple of important factors to consider, and then share some saving milestones to help you stay on track along the way there. A quick note before we get into it, as always, these are general guidelines, not personalized financial advice. We say that a lot, but especially for this episode, just wanted to touch on it and highlight that because we're going to be throwing out various suggestions, various ideas, useful for a broad audience, but not super individualized. With this topic, it's something that if you're working with us or another financial advisor, we can actually model out using a pretty sophisticated retirement cash flow calculator just to actually model that out for you specifically. And then even throw in a couple of what if scenarios. What if markets don't behave the way that we want them to for the first 5 years of your retirement, so on and so forth, and do a bit of that stress testing.
You know, Ben, I'm going to highlight that even more.
Sure.
You've said it, but I think it bears repeating. This particular episode, more than any other, we're gonna just give some rules of thumb, but it really there are so many variables that it really is best in this scenario to actually model out your specific personal scenario. Hopefully, the rules of thumb that we give you will just help give you some comfort, but don't rely on them, or maybe not give you comfort. Maybe hopefully they'll prompt you to actually go out and make something happen. But don't just rely on the rules of thumb that were thrown out today. Get somebody to model this stuff out for you.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I wanted to talk about too is last time we gave a bit of an idea of this is what you're going to have in retirement just from your pensions already. And this is the cash flow deficit that, or the cash flow that you need. And so therefore there's a deficit. That's kind of what we're going to be talking about here. That's going to be situational for different people. I, for example, don't have a workplace pension, and my retirement potentially is so far off that I don't really want to be relying on what may or may not be there in terms of government plans. Things could change. So for someone like me, I'm just trying to save up based on my income today. What do I want to have saved up? Someone else, if they've identified that they need or they want to spend, let's say, 10 grand in retirement, but they've already got 8 grand covered by their various pensions and the government pension. Really, we're just talking about that $2,000 a month deficit. And we're probably going to annualize everything for this episode and just treat that as a 24,000 per year deficit, just to keep things simple. So yeah, just wanted to tackle those right away before we actually get into the big question here. Arnold, do you want to tackle that? Get into the actual numbers here. How much does one need to have saved up going into
Yeah,
retirement?
sure. I'll start off with that. Before I do, though, one thing I don't want to leave our listeners with the impression that Canada Pension Plan isn't likely to be there. I know, Ben just indicated he's because he's so far out, he's not wanting to rely on government pensions, and that's a wise thing to do. But the government made some changes to our CPP system, our Canada Pension Plan system, quite a few years ago, and it is now treated like any other pension plan. And particularly for those of us anywhere around my age, 50s and 60s, it's there. It's going to be there for you. What we don't know is how they're going to tweak it, what changes they're going to make. Um, I think particularly for old age security, there's more likely that there'll be clawbacks, things like that. But we don't want to leave you with the impression that you can't rely on the government pensions. It's always better if you just rely on yourself. But the Canada Pension Plan is here to stay.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. And what I meant by that was more so on my side of things.
Sure.
What if I leave Canada? What if I work abroad and I don't contribute to Canada Pension Plan? There are any number of reasons
Yeah.
why I just would prefer
Yeah.
to say depend on myself. And then, yes, I know those will be there for Canadian retirees going forwards. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So rule of thumb, how much do you need? Um, uh, I'm going to talk about a net worth goal a little bit later on, but for now, just in terms of retirement money, there's a 4% rule that's been used for, man, as long as I can remember. And like it's very widely used. Depending on somebody's situation, I'll tweak it a little bit myself, up or down, but it's a 4% rule. They're an assumption that you're pretty safe if you target taking 4% annually out of your portfolio. And you've got it's not guaranteed, but a very high probability of it lasting 30 years. And so if you're retiring at 65 or even 60, that's probably going to last your lifetime. A lot of factors to take into account there. Sometimes I drop that down to 3.5. Sometimes I bump it up to 4.5. If you're taking it later or earlier. It was originally that some studies have been done originally based on U.S. stocks and bonds only. So it's not as applicable here in Canada or for global investors, but um, it probably is. It's just the studies have really been done on U.S. stocks and bonds. You can Google up the Trinity study. You'll see it's focused on U.S. markets. Also, if you're going to retire real early, that may be too aggressive a withdrawal because your money has to last longer, right?
Well,
So
exactly. And I kind of view it that way as well, is that for somebody planning to retire at 65, the 4% rule feels pretty appropriate. If you think about that, even if they don't earn any investment growth, they could maintain a certain withdrawal at 4% for 25 years.
that's right.
Now that's not indexed to inflation. We'll talk about that in a bit, but yeah, exactly what you said. I think that's reasonably appropriate for a 65-year-old. As you're hoping to retire early and earlier, I think that's a little bit aggressive, and you may want to tone that down.
Yeah, and related to that is sort of a 25 times rule. Take a look at how much you think you're going to need to withdraw each year. Uh, Again, thinking about retirement. So we're not talking about your total income here. We're just talking about how much you're going to withdraw out of your portfolio, how much you think that is, multiply it by 25 to estimate what your retirement nest egg should be. So for example, if you think you're going to want 40 grand a year from your investments, 25 times that's $1 million. So you want to target a portfolio size of $1 million. Even if you targeted 20 times, if you're 65, you'll probably be okay, but there's more risk. Um, and that assumes no investment growth. So your money would last for 25 years just by drawing down the principal. In reality, you're going to have some investment growth, but don't forget, inflation's there as well. So you need to think about adjusting for inflation and for risk. You want to talk about that, Ben?
Well, exactly, and that's what I was going to mention too, is that if you start your retirement withdrawing 40,000 from your investments, and then 20 years later you're still withdrawing 40,000 from your investments and you haven't adjusted it for inflation, your purchasing power has gone down because, as we all know, inflation is eroding the purchasing power. So it's something that you want to keep an eye on. You'd ideally be maintaining some growth in the investments as you go. Um, I mean, oftentimes you'll be drawing down from the investments over time, but it's just something you want to keep an eye on. And then it depends too. The we can't just give one number for what you're going to earn in your retirement portfolio. As we all know, that's going to depend on your investment risk tolerance, how the investments do, and everything in there. You might earn more than 4% annually, allowing for a higher withdrawal rate. Again, these are some things that are very individualized. There is no one size fits all approach um, for this kind of thing. And that being said, someone aiming for more investment growth within their retirement portfolio, well, higher returns come with higher volatility, and that raises the risk, hence the need for some kind of strategy around that withdrawal. Two withdrawal strategies I really like to use.
Actually, Ben, but before you jump into that, just to talk about inflation just a little bit more here. Um, what's a chocolate bar go for today?
I'm not really a big snacker,
Oh, like,
but
isn't it
I don't
around
know,
$2 in the
$2. Yeah,
grocery store, something like that, right?
yeah,
When
probably.
I was growing up, when I was a kid, I could go to the corner store and a chocolate bar was 10 cents. And in fact, I remember very distinctly, if I went across the street to I don't remember what drugstore it was, but there was a little drugstore downtown Vancouver. And if I went to that drugstore, I could get the chocolate bars for 9 cents. 10% discount. I always remember as a kid, I could get one more chocolate bar for $1 if I went across the street. But, to think about that and, 10 cents to about $2. And I don't know if that's indicative of normal inflation or not, but I do know that over 30 years of retirement, if you're expecting a 2 to 3% inflation rate, you need to expect an erosion of your spending ability by, uh, I
Pretty
think
much
it's two
half.
thirds. Yeah, or yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well,
half to 2/3.
I
So,
mean, using the rule of 72, right, is
right,
where if you were doing our viewers probably don't know what that rule is, but as it applies to this particular topic, if you were looking at inflation at about 2.5%, it would take about 29 or 30 years for your purchasing power to be halved,
right,
right?
yeah,
And
that's
so
right, yeah,
exactly a $2 chocolate bar today, 29 years from now is likely to be $4 instead.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So, you want to be able to make sure that you're compensating for that because otherwise you're just going to be going broke slowly, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, so you're a retiree, you want to spend 40 grand a year from your investment portfolio, you've saved up $1 million in that retirement portfolio. Now what? Right? Retirement's coming. How are you going to draw down from that? Um, Two strategies that I really like to use. Number one, what we would call a cash wedge strategy. So basically, that's the idea that you need to withdraw some of this money. You also need or want to invest some of this money to maintain its purchasing power over the long haul. How are you going to balance those two things? The cash wedge strategy is one where you might keep a certain amount of that portfolio in a very low risk sub portfolio or in cash, something that's not really going to ride the ups and downs with the market. That frees you up to then with the rest of the portfolio put it into an investment portfolio. You can mentally handle the ups and downs a little bit better because you know that you've got 3 years or 5 years worth of withdrawal in this low risk cash portfolio, whatever you want to call it. So,
That's
yeah.
actually one of my favorite strategies too. I remember decades ago reading a book by a guy named Nick Murray, and I don't even know if he's still alive today, but his what he suggested, and this is a bit too aggressive for my liking, but what he suggested was actually you take 2 years worth of your withdrawal needs, throw it in cash, and put the rest all in equities, 100% stock portfolio. And he went back tested it, and every time the market dipped by more than 25%, he had you going into that cash wedge, and you had enough there for the markets to recover, and then you would replenish the wedge. And I guess if you've got good dividend paying stocks and they're slowly replenishing that cash a little bit too, but 2 years seemed a little bit tight for me. But like you said, that 3 to 5 year range, it actually um, would allow you to go into an all equity portfolio. Although even there, I don't know about you, Ben, but I find most of the time I'm putting a client in not as aggressive as an all equity portfolio for that remaining position. It's usually, but it's growth oriented, but it's not as aggressive as an all equity portfolio. But certainly conceptually, that is one of my favorite ways to go.
Yeah, well, I find it helpful too, just as a talking point that, I mean, we're going to talk more probably in a future episode about the ups and downs and the risks, rewards, and what do we mean by an all equity portfolio and all of that stuff. But I find it's helpful when talking with a client and trying to gauge that risk tolerance to say, you know what, we've put 5 years worth of your withdrawals in something really safe, we're really confident about with the rest of the portfolio, how much risk are you comfortable taking on? And so it's valuable
Right.
from that perspective, just setting the frame. Also, as you've said, it works with the back testing as well to have a little bit of stability for those redemptions. So that's one we really like. We employ a lot. The other one we probably employ a little bit less, but it's something that you can do as well. Would be a dynamic withdrawal, basically adjustment. So that would be where you're planning to withdraw 40,000 a year, but you know, if we have a string of bad years in the markets, maybe you're comfortable reducing your spending a little bit over that time down to 30,000 or whatever it is. So it's just adjusting the number, trying not to take so much out of the investments when they're down and when things have gone down. So
Interestingly, we saw that happen naturally actually during COVID. People that were used to taking out lump sums to travel, all of a sudden the markets are down, but they couldn't travel either. And so they ended up, at least, I saw lots of situations where people took out less out of their portfolios just naturally. Uh, and Fortunately, markets recovered very quickly in that instance. But certainly, yeah, that's people don't like to do that because yeah, markets are down. They still want to travel or still want to do their thing. So again, like as Ben said, we don't use it that often, but there are some cases where it makes sense.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's a good point too, is that I think it's just the natural state of things. In the same way, we talk about the wealth effect sometimes, in that when people feel really, really wealthy, they spend more. That's shouldn't be
Exactly. Yeah,
surprising,
that's right.
really. But you know, when the house price has gone up way through the roof and people have a high net worth, they spend more. The same thing in reverse. When markets tank and people have less of a retirement portfolio, they just naturally spend less, whether they consciously choose to do that or not. Um, so yeah, those are kind of the two strategies in terms of redeeming from your investments. A third one that we can talk about would be different from really a withdrawal strategy. That would just be going straight to some kind of annuity or guaranteed income product. So that would be where you're taking your $1 million that you've got saved away, you send it over to an insurance company, and then you just receive a guaranteed payout monthly for the rest of your life. Oftentimes that can be indexed to inflation or not. It's going to change the numbers, but that's sort of another option there, is to offload the risk to somebody else. Someone else manages the investment, and you just get, like I said, monthly income for the rest of your life.
So milestones along the way. Uh, how much do you think you should have saved at your age? There's a few ways that you can look at that. Some benchmarks, assuming you're targeting that 25 times target at age 65 for a traditional retirement. At age 35, you'd need about 3 times your spending need. By age 45, you'd need about 8 times. By age 55, you'd need 16 times. And that should put you on target for that 25. I actually like to use just as a benchmark. It's not the end all and the be all, but I like to use a formula that was developed by a couple of guys named Stanley and Danko in a book written, oh man, 30 years ago called The Millionaire Next Door. So this is when $1 million actually meant something. Well, it still means something, but back then it really meant something. And for those of you that are watching us, not listening, there's a copy of that book, The Millionaire Next Door, and they actually have, and there's some caveats with this, but they actually have a formula for how much you should have saved, or actually more accurately, what your net worth should be. Uh, Take your age, multiply it by your pre-tax annual household income from all sources except for inheritances, and then divide that by 10. So let's say you're 50 years old and you're making um, 100 grand a year, 50 times 100, $500,000. That's how much you should have saved up. Um, oh, sorry. 50 times 100 would be 5 million. Divide that by 10, $500,000. That's how much you should be. Now even Stanley and Danko, even they say, well, I mean, that's sort of the mid range. Anywhere between half that and double that would be reasonable. But if you're below half that, you're a little bit behind the eight ball. If you're above double that, you're doing fantastic. What that doesn't factor in is if you have a great pension, you don't need to save as much, and your net worth is likely to actually be less because you have this future guaranteed payment. And so you do need to account for some of those things a little bit, but it is a nice, simple rule of thumb. Take your age, multiply it by your income, divide it by 10, just to give you just a little quick check. Am I in the ballpark of that? Do I have more than half that? And if not, don't panic. You can make adjustments. You can get things corrected. And there may be reasons. Like I said, if you have a fantastic pension and you're not able to save as much money, that may be reasonable. So don't let that worry you if you don't have it, but do let it be just a quick little check. It's one of my favorite little tools, just as a quick peek.
Yeah, well, and with things like that, with heuristics, I like them because they're simple.
Right, right.
I don't like them because it's we already talked about this whole talk is it's
Yeah,
not one size fits all. The
that's right.
heuristics, especially, you can't really just take a look at it and say this blanket rule applies to everybody. I find, especially with things like that, they are a little bit too aggressive for young people.
Right. Yes, that's a good
It's
point.
like something like that. I just ran it. I'm 31. Let's say I earn 100 grand a year. So based on this rule, I need 310 grand saved. For an average 31-year-old in Vancouver that doesn't own a house, like that just is a very
Right.
aggressive target. And anecdotally, we're probably the best people to give anecdotal stories, is that most people really start to ramp up the retirement savings between age 50 and 65. And so you're liable to be short of that heuristic target earlier than that, and then hopefully
And
catching
above
up
it
or even
later.
exceeding
Yeah,
it
yeah.
later. So just sort of word of warning there. Those numbers, like if you're behind, don't panic. You can make adjustments, whether it's adjusting the I guess the point there is sometimes adjustments have to be made, whether it's adjusting your savings now or adjusting your retirement target in terms of the date or how much you're going to spend. But you do have some flexibility there. And if you're ahead, that's great. You have more flexibility with your retirement timing or with the spending there. Um, so a couple of things we haven't really talked about yet, key factors that are going to influence that nest egg that you need to have saved. Number one, potentially dipping into home equity. Now, this is something that I like to pretend that we're not going to do, pretend the home doesn't even exist, and let's solve for the retirement on its own. Hopefully, you can stay in the family home and you don't need to downsize, but we always know that it's there as a backup if you need to. That might be too conservative of an approach, right? A lot of retirees, they have a lot of home equity in their house. They could use it. They could improve their retirement spending and their retirement lifestyle. So that's again something that we can go back and forth on. But my first instinct usually is to pretend that you're going to live in the family home forever, and like I said, solve for retirement without
Yeah,
that.
I think I kind of tend to do the same thing for when people are younger, and then as they approach retirement, say, you do have this equity in your home, and oftentimes I find very often people do downsize, or certainly in the later years in life, they do end up selling their home and moving into some sort of a assisted living facility, and so the reality is you're going to use the equity in your home there. But it's a great idea to plan on not using it and then it's always there as a backup.
Well, exactly. It's just a way of mitigating risk, right?
Exactly.
To
Yeah.
plan for it without and to have a backup. Now, you do that too many times and you end up with way too conservative of a plan. And so that's just where I like to have a back and forth and say, how do you want to handle this? And sort of pretend that we're going to do it that way. Other things we haven't talked about, or we've talked about a little bit, but the investment risk tolerance, that's going to impact your potential returns. It's going to impact your withdrawal sustainability. We're going to dip into this much more in a future episode, probably next episode. We're going to talk about that. And then third, we haven't really talked about taxes too much. So again, not going to cover that too much today, but it is critical for the planning. What does the tax situation look like? Is all of that income taxable or is it not? So again, we're going to have a conversation in a future episode about tax efficient withdrawals or just different tax investments or tax efficient investments rather.
So a couple of key takeaways. We've said it a few times. There is no one size fits all answer. Your what you need depends on your spending needs, your investment strategy, your risk tolerance, your pension income, a whole bunch of things. No rules of thumb are gonna help you really figure this out. They'll just, help you get a little bit of a start. You really need to look at the entire picture for you, customized.
Yeah,
Also,
well, and there's no one size fits all answer. But if we were to give a guideline, if we had to, it's try to save up 25 times your spending need.
right, yeah.
And then Arnold had given his rule basically to get to track yourself along the way to that thing. But yeah, again, rules of thumb can be useful, but really retirement projections are better if they're customized. And then in terms of the withdrawal, consider using either the cash wedge strategy, keeping some money aside in a lower risk sub portfolio, or having a dynamic withdrawal strategy to manage your risk if things go down.
So thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Retiring BC podcast. We've covered how to estimate the nest egg that you need using common guidelines and the importance of being flexible in your retirement planning and some key savings milestones to aim for.
Yeah, exactly. And so, if you're wanting to get a more personalized plan for you, feel free to visit our website, which is visionvest.ca. I realized last time we didn't spell it out, but that is Visionvest with 2 V's as in Victor. So Victor, ISION, Victor, EST.ca. You can click on Start a Conversation and chat with us. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe, whether you're listening to this on Spotify or watching on YouTube or whatever. And we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks for listening in.
Bye. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast may not necessarily reflect those of IPC Securities Corporation or IPC Investment Corporation. The information provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as financial, legal, or tax advice. The hosts and creators of this podcast assume no liability for actions taken based on the content discussed.